centavos per liter. Kerosene will also be pricier by 5 pesos and 45 cents per liter.
Definitely itong mawawalang Russian oil, around 3 million barrels of crude oil per day yan. Pag nagkiagaw ito na nga ang perception ng market, definitely tumataas na po ang price.
And it's not just fuel. The Department of Agriculture says rice prices could go up by as much as 6 pesos per kilo later this year.
46 na yan, assuming na walang export ban. Pero kung nag-export ban sila at nagkaroon ng greater demand sa rice dahil pag-ship ng other wheat-eating countries sa bigas, alam nga hindi natin masasabi kung saan naaabot.
Another oil price hike will be implemented starting tomorrow, with diesel rising by as much as 6 pesos and 55 centavos per liter. Not only that, the Agriculture Department also expects a possible rise in the price of rice by up to 6 pesos per kilo by the end of 2022. How can Filipinos cope with the rising prices of these basic commodities? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to the Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin online, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5, and here in the studio in Mandaluyong with us, Ed Lingao of One News. Chiefs, kaya pa ba?
Happy Monday.
Monday pa lang kaya mo ba?
Happy talaga ang Monday, ha?
Oh, Monday. Kasi hindi pa Tuesday. Tuesday, tataas na naman ang...
Monday, dahil may pasok kami. Sunday night, ang daming nag-iintay mga stranded. Ayaw nang lumabas ng mga jeepney. Wala na daw silang kinikita.
Wala na. Ang pagbabawi nun, di ba?
Oh, pagkatapos kahit may pera ka, pinag-uusapan nga natin sa araw, walang pagkukunan ng carbs si Ed. Walang, di ba? Walang trigo.
May pizza naman
walang, antayin mo lang. Walang ensaymada. Di ba? Mahal ng rice. Paano yan? Anyway.
Pero kaya raw ang 20 pesos sa kilo.
Kaya daw. Basta maayos
For
lahat.
3 months, kakayanin.
Pero Dario, Dario nagsabi nun, yung DA, yung sabi, baka daw umakit ng
Kaya nga eh.
Bakit yan? Ang layo, ano?
Anyway, tingnan natin kung ang guest natin, mabibigyan tayo ng linaw. Joining us is Ibon Foundation Executive Director, Sunny Africa. Good evening. Welcome to the Chiefs, Mr. Africa.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, ganda gabi.
Good evening.
Happy Monday na parang
Happy,
feeling ko Friday na.
Happy, promise, ha? Sige, umpisa.
You've been working all week, ano ng feeling mo?
Hindi, with the lockdowns, alam mo, you don't know what the days are anymore. Pati yung gabi, hindi mo na alam kasi it all blurs.
Disoriented na.
Sige, tingnan natin kung tatagal yung mood natin, ha, na happy. I do want to start with the moment that we're in, di ba? We're waiting for, well, we're not waiting for Tuesday. We're bracing for Tuesday. Tataas na naman ang presyo ng langis, hahampas ng 80 kada litro. Of course, the drivers, operators are now petitioning for higher fares as well. In the meantime, nagtataasan at hindi natin mahanap ang pagkain din. Ano bang, I mean, is there any reprieve? Is there a ceiling to this problem that you're seeing at this point?
Alam nyo, even if the Ukraine conflict resolves itself, we're not actually sure how the US will operate kasi. If they keep up with the sanctions, kahit resolve na quote-unquote yung nangyari sa Ukraine, kung patuloy pa rin, we'll still have problems with the food and fuel commodity prices. Tapos on top of the interest rate increases, yung bloated, hindi lang Philippine debt, bloated global debt, we're seeing record levels of debt worldwide, not just in the underdeveloped countries, even in the developed countries. It's so volatile, parang there's so much pressure to get our house in order para kung ano mangyari sa ibang bansa, medyo stable tayo. Pero yung nga, di ba, lumabas yung balita, nagko-consider ng export cartel on rice. So, you know, parang...
Yan na. Okay na.
Naghang yata. Are you with us, Sunny?
The chicken's coming home to roost. Yung mga policy area. Hello?
Yeah, we lost you for a few
Wala ba?
seconds there. We lost you for
Sorry.
about 5 seconds there.
Oh no, I hope I said something awful at that time. Is that okay now?
Sige, sige, okay,
You were
malinaw
talking
ngayon.
about
Okay,
policy,
sorry, yeah.
policy decisions.
Sige, back to the chickens kami
Ah.
ng Cruz.
Hindi, yun. Feeling namin, actually, marami sa nireklamo, halimbawa regarding rice security. We're feeling things now eh. If the major rice exporters like Vietnam put up a rice export cartel, yung cartels are always about constraining supply and increasing prices. That's not going to be good for the country. So medyo, all the complaints about rice self-sufficiency, about rice security being too expensive. Well, hopefully we don't pay the price for ganong klaseng decisions. Just liberalize and let actually rice farmers go bankrupt. Let rice production wallow in its unproductiveness.
Okay, but you're talking about
Yun
rice.
nga,
But
nawala kami.
what about
Hindi,
what about
okay
all
na.
the other all the other commodities that may be affected by, for example, the oil price increases we've been seeing in the past few weeks, especially with the one coming in later tonight. That's a big chunk. That's 6 pesos plus for diesel, which is mostly used for transportation and production. So what do you expect from that?
Well, unfortunately, ever higher prices. And the thing is, we're not just going to feel it in terms of higher transport fares. Yung higher global oil has already been translated into more expensive farm inputs, diba? A lot of farm inputs are actually petroleum intensive. So they're actually driving the price of the cost of production up. And if you add that to falling farm gate prices, halimbawa for rice, since rice stabilization, actually ang naiipit talaga yung mga farmers. And again, all the claims now, well, if it's cheap to import from abroad, it's good for the consumer. Para sa amin, you have to look at it holistically. The farmers, apart from also being consumers, the farmers are the anchor for rice security. And if you're not supporting them, letting them fold either from cheap imports from Vietnam and Thailand, which are super subsidized, by the way, until now. If you're going to let them fold, displaced na sila, and we're not any close to rice security. We're actually moving even further away from rice security and being so vulnerable to this threat of a rice export cartel.
Well,
Pero di ba meron yung rice tarification, meron naman silang subsidy from, okay, I know. It's
Sorry.
funny now when we talk about it in the context of everything that's happening now that they absolutely no one foresaw last year when they actually, made it into law. So, how does it bode for the farmers now in this environment?
Okay, example lang. Since 2018, the rice tarification law started actually getting traction in 2019. Since 2018, farm gate prices have been falling. It was over 21 pesos before, it's under 17 pesos na now. At the same time, cost of production is increasing. So it's very strange, well, not strange for, I think, progressives. I think the government should reconsider why, with rice tarification, okay, it's true, nag-stabilize yung rice. But farmers, on average, have been losing over 12,000 pesos per hectare from that double whammy of lower farm gate prices for their palay and higher cost of production. So para sa amin, that's not actually sustainable. And that decrease in their earnings come amid this supposed 10 billion subsidy from the RCEP tariffs. But we have to keep going back. Thailand and Vietnam, I think Vietnam, our last count a couple of years ago, they're subsidizing their rice farmers at over $1.5 billion a year. So parang the 10 billion, alam mo, it's yung style ng Congress, yun na pa sa really bad law, tapos may konting sweetener ka, na kung wari, okay, it's a safety net, pero may timing yung safety net, and it's always token.
Yes,
Unfortunately, it's sugarcoating for a really bad policy. And tingnan namin yung what's happening now globally, hindi lang actually sa oil. It's magkaugnay naman lahat ng parts ng economy. Higher oil prices, higher transport costs, higher fertilizer costs, or whatever. Parang that's all, again, that's the chicken coming home to roost. And it's something na so many people have warned about before. And the time to worry about it, when it's exploding, that's too late na. And I think it's really time for a rethink about a lot of our old policies. Tapos, alam ko yung legacy, and if you bothered to watch the Duterte economic
Duterte
legacy
legacy,
thing
yeah.
nung Monday and Tuesday, di ba? You have the economic chief manager saying unprecedented economic achievements in the last 6 years. Parang you have to wonder, the agriculture falling to its smallest in the country's history, that's not an economic achievement. Manufacturing falling to its smallest in 70 years, that's not an achievement. Rice farmers losing almost 12,000 pesos per hectare because of rice certification, that's not an achievement. I mean, pwede ako maglitanya, pero ano mo yun, sinisindak tayo with all these spectacle and bluster and all these hyperbolic statements. Pero para sa amin, I mean, even naman at the very end, we use government data. We echo it back to the public. Hopefully, magka-traction. But if the government doesn't want to listen, well, they don't listen.
Well, so
Mali din
ngayon, we mentioned it at the start of the show, no? Merong disagreement yung two major departments involved in rice production. Sabi ng Department of Agriculture, no way na ma-achieve yung 20 per kilo rice. At in fact, baka daw end of the year, maging 6 pesos higher, yung mga mababa. Yeah, yung ano yun, yung mga affordable rice yun. And the Department of Agriculture naman sabi, kaya daw yung 20. Ano ba yung take ninyo doon? Kaya ba?
Well, ang take namin, the 20 pesos, kung kaya, if the government spends 250 billion pesos to subsidize everyone's rice consumption, of course, mag-20 pesos per kilo yan. But is that rational? Hindi eh. So, again, a lot of the mga simplistic na pang-kampanya na pangako, the 20 pesos, it's politically motivated, but it's economically irrational. And even yung mga sinasabi ng, like you said po, yung mga proposals na ganyan, it doesn't get to the heart of the matter. If you want cheap rice, we have to subsidize domestic production. And if you want to subsidize domestic production, we have to choose to give it more emphasis than infrastructure. And sa amin, another grating thing, under the Duterte administration, the budget for agriculture has actually been falling. It was about almost 4% at the start of the administration. It's now less than 3% of the national budget. So para sa amin, all this talk about, let's support the farmers, we believe in food security. At the end of the day, if the government isn't putting its money where its mouth is, if it's so fixated on this infrastructure offensive, ang madedehado talaga, which they had for the last 6 administrations at the very least, yung agriculture natin and our farmers, and ultimately, our food security.
But speaking of infrastructure, other than subsidy, if I got the story right kanina, binanggit din nila, parang that this Department of Agrarian Reform saying that we will have a program essentially to consolidate the farming, to consolidate lands. And I would presume that's heading towards industrializing farming and so on. Now, they framing it as vision, as aspiration. Is that at least in the right direction?
It is in the right direction, but our problem is, actually, all agricultural programs, in terms of supporting agriculture, have always been in the right direction. They always say, we'll help provide cheap inputs, we'll help provide cheap financing, we'll provide research and extension services, we'll provide infrastructure like farm-to-market roads, post-harvest facilities. The thing is, lahat sila sinasabi yan, but when it comes to the actual budget, it's so striking. Over the decades, actually the share of agriculture in the national budget has been shrinking. And it's actually shrunk the worst of the last 6 administrations under the administration. So kung direct lang, okay naman siya. But, if you're not and liberalizing the sector, it takes time for those production support to have traction eh. But kung binubukas mo na to super subsidized rice from Thailand and Vietnam, in the end, the market will go to the cheap rice and your domestic producers won't have a chance to build up their capacity, their productivity, and cheapen their produce in time for all these reforms to take effect.
What about hearing me? My internet is also unstable actually.
Yeah, hindi lang ako.
Okay, but they're saying that, let's leave agriculture aside, but they're now saying that business is opening up, business is heating up again with the pandemic, at least looking like it's sizing. So ours is a consumer-oriented, consumer-centric, actually, economy. And they're putting a lot of stock in that. Is there anything wrong with that? I mean, with business now getting into full swing, people are now going out more, and so on and so forth. We do see some growth ahead, don't we?
Yes and no. Yes, we see growth because as the population grows, as people look for ways to make a living and provide for their families, there's always going to be a minimum level of growth. And I think historically naman, except for times of crises like COVID, tuloy-tuloy naman ang growth. But the question is it growing enough to actually raise everyone's standard of living? And are the benefits of growth being distributed fairly? On that first point about is there going to be enough growth to raise standards of living? We have to remember, even before the pandemic, growth was slowing. For every year of the Duterte administration, 2017, 2018, 2019, growth was getting slower and slower. Ngayon, may convenient smokescreen sila, the pandemic, and the 9.5% collapse to say na, oh, things were great sana before the pandemic. That's not true. Despite all that increase in infrastructure spending, mga 590 billion, I think, in 2016 to over $1 trillion by 2019, despite higher and higher infrastructure spending, wala yung multiplier effects, growth was slowing. So that was the situation before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, again, sobrang misguided yung over-reliance on lockdowns. Perhaps the economy were the worst in Asia, hindi lang in Southeast Asia. Apart from Maldives, na syempre, tourism dependent, we had the biggest economic collapse in the whole of Asia. South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia. Because of that collapse in the economy, because of lockdowns that shouldn't have been that deep or for that long, we actually are facing now the worst unemployment in the region. We have the worst increase, or second worst increase dun sa mga deficits natin. We're the only ones that saw our national debt double. And we actually, right now, it's so awful, 7 out of 10 Filipino households don't even have any savings. That's about 3 million more than before the pandemic. So yeah, we're a consumption-driven economy. But if the jobs aren't there, if families' incomes are down, where's the consumption going to come from? And sa amin, it's overstating it to say na, okay, yung sabi ng government, we're opening na, recovery is rapid. The only reason may rapid growth tayo na 8% the last quarter was kasi things were so bad first quarter of last year. And guaranteed, in the coming quarters, maybe not in the second one, but at least second semester, we're going to be seeing much lower growth rates. Mag-normalize na yan, and definitely it's going to normalize at a much lower level in coming years for two reasons. So much scarring from the pandemic, lost incomes, lost jobs, closed businesses. At the same time, wala na fiscal space because of the government's mishandling of our finances. How are you going to be boosting the economy if you don't have any money because nga of this bad debt policy, bad fiscal policy for the last 2 years?
Well, a new team is coming in and it's been widely applauded. No? Kayo, anong tingin niyo? Ibon Foundation, what do you think of the, something old, something new, no? Yung mga faces, ano? What do you think of the new economic team?
Sa amin, ang pinaka-welcome doon, sa totoo lang, is SEC Balisakan. Kasi our problem with previous planning secretaries, they're so finance-oriented and old school development oriented. Si Sec Balisakan comes in with a long expertise in poverty and agriculture. So hopefully you'll be able to sort of shift economic policy in a more socially desirable direction. Ang problem lang, he has such a huge uphill battle kasi any social measure does need resources. And in the end, if the head of the economic team says, that's a great idea, good directions, keep up the good work, pero sorry, we can't fund it right now because we don't want to charge those who can afford it. That's going to go in the back burner. And we have to remember, Sec Balisakan, despite yung personal advocacy for poverty and agriculture, during the Aquino administration, that's actually when this trend of jobless growth started. Ang bilis ng economic growth at that time, but job generation on an annual basis is actually getting slower and slower. And siguro, I attributed that to Sec Balisakan, yung pag-increase ng 4-piece program. That was a good thing as a band-aid. But the thing is, 10 years later, bakit band-aid pa rin, di ba? If you want to resolve poverty, you don't throw money at the poor, you ensure the economy creates jobs for the poor. And yun ang problema, I think, sa balisakan ngayon. If it's going to be stuck with an economic team,
Institutionalized na
Oh, sige, let's take on that. Let's take on that problem. How does the incoming government fund its programs and plans? Saan manggagaling?
well, sa amin ang bottom line, they have to think creatively. Kasi we actually heard a few interviews of si incoming Secretary Jokman na he's still very keen on consumption taxes. So nabanggit nga ni Ma'am Lucci, we're a consumption-driven economy. Ang problema doon, if you tax consumption, two problems. One, you're depressing demand because nga 70% of the economy is consumption. Ikalawa, at tax natin yung mahihirap because most people are poor. Yun nga, and 7 out of 10 don't even have any savings. So if the government thinks now we're going to raise money from consumption taxes, that's going to be problematic, magkakahangganan doon. If it thinks now we're going to generate more money from collections, again, you want to hope for the best, but in the last 40 years, the only real increases in revenue effort have always been from new taxes. Unfortunately, new consumption taxes. So, let's hope na may magic wand talaga with digitization and all of those promises to increase collection efficiency. But that's not going to happen. And if the government still thinks in the old way, the only way to raise taxes ay tax the poor through consumption taxes, regressive taxes, problema yon. And even for the last 3 years, we've been pushing billionaire wealth tax talaga. I mean, the IMF has proposed this. Nobel Prize winners proposed.
If not consumption tax, what other source of revenue could there be? I mean, corporate tax or like the office proposing
Billionaires
it,
tax,
delay the cutback in reducing income taxes.
Defer the train.
Alam mo yung differ? Of course, ang pinakamahirapan doon, numerically, are you middle class who benefited from the income tax cuts? Sa amin, there's no sense differing it dun sa people earning 1 million to over 20 million pesos. Kasi the train law, hindi na siya pang middle class eh. Even families, yung sa tax bracket 1 million to 20 million and above, may benefits din sila. So para sa amin, ganong klaseng not middle class, upper income families, they should pay more pa. Pero secondly, it's so straightforward. Even the UN has so many studies. The only progressive tax there is are direct taxes of income and wealth. And if the government wants a revenue source na hindi pa bigat sa ordinaryong Pilipino, they have to start with direct taxes on income, on high income families na binabaan under the train law, and direct taxes on their wealth. And sa amin, it's so socially irresponsible na you have 3,000 billionaires in the country with over 8 trillion pesos in wealth, but that's not being touched. And yung proposal namin sa Ibon, it's so cheap. It's like a 1% tax on wealth over 1 billion, 2% over 2 billion, and 3% over 3 billion. That's nothing. The richest Filipino now has 330 billion pesos. After the billionaire tax, may 310 billion pesos pa siya. So sa amin, maraming rhetoric about nation building, giving back yung mga to.
Okay,
let's institutionalize that.
Okay. But I think also it aligned with their thrust toward inviting more foreign direct investments. No? I think yun yung kanilang objective also, right? To make the Philippines attractive to investors, especially foreign investors. Is that a good tack also?
Is it a good tack to tax foreign investors? I'm sorry. Or
to invite them, because if you raise taxes,
Sige.
Diba? Di ayaw na ng mga investors, diba? Hindi sila kikita. Because
foreign investors won't be taxed eh. No, foreign investors won't be taxed. The target of a billionaire tax is very focused. 3,000 Filipino billionaires, just tax them. It's been done in Colombia. In Colombia nga, mas broad-based yung wealth tax nila eh. I think even a lot of middle-class Colombians are paying a wealth tax. But Colombia now has among the best foreign investment inflows in Latin America. So, naalala ko when the Makabayan Bloc filed the wealth tax bill in the last Congress, si Sec Dominguez, may knee-jerk reaction talaga siya. They sent us a reply with all these mga spurious arguments na it happened in France, all the rich left France. Sobrang spurious arguments. And we want to stress, pinag-aralan naman namin ito, the only thing stopping this wealth tax from actually taking traction is the billionaires not wanting to pay. It doesn't affect their businesses. It doesn't affect foreign investors.
And the billionaires are in Congress.
Ah, yeah. How will you ram it through
Diba?
Congress?
The billionaires are in Congress. That's the biggest problem. So why don't we talk about duopolies? Halimbawa, yung cutting excise tax or VAT on fuel. What about that? Yun yung hinihingi ng mga ng ibang transport sector.
Kasi kung well, again, ibang usapin yun. If the idea is to try to moderate yung increase in global oil the last few months and probably for the next months pa, taking away all excess tax will of course help moderate that. But right now, kahit nang halimbawa yung 6 peso tax on diesel, halos 30 pesos na tinaas ang diesel since the start of the year. So alam mo yun, it can help take the edge off, but one, it's revenue losing. Secondly, as things develop, that's not going to be enough to actually help poor families. At para sa amin, we know it seems like a long shot because there are so many billionaires in Congress, and arguably, if you count ill-gotten wealth, even the becoming president is a billionaire. But para sa amin, if that's going to be a reason, not even consider it, if you're going to be stuck with indirect taxes, without fail, there is no other tax apart from a direct tax on income and wealth that does not burden already poor Filipinos. At sa amin, that's unconscionable, especially after the 2 years of the pandemic. But actually, even before the pandemic, hindi na dapat eh. Kasi, did you know, ito weird to ha, every time may crisis sa Philippines, the pandemic crisis, the global financial crisis noong 2008-2009, the Asian financial crisis, these exact 3 years were the years na binabaan yung corporate income tax. So parang isipin mo, parang something's wrong here. In a time of crisis, ang sinasala ng government, yung big corporations. And every time may tax revenue effort increase, it's from higher consumption taxes. So para sa amin, that has to be rethought talaga eh. I mean, any government sincere about being socially responsible, about being more equitable. Sabi naman ni incoming President Marcos, niniwala siya sa redistribution of wealth. So let's hold them to that. Parang, can we at least try? Parang sa amin naman ganun lang eh. We have to put that on the table, shift the envelope a bit. If it doesn't work, it's not for want of trying. It's an investment. Mali natin. We have a more progressive administration or Congress in 3 years or in 6 years.
Good luck on that.
Hindi, I know it seems like a long shot, but honestly, the alternative is so much worse. The only alternative to direct taxes are higher indirect taxes on poor Filipinos. Yung consumption tax, the government loves that, the IMF loves that, kasi walang choice ang mahirap na Pilipino eh. You have to pay the VAT, you have to pay the consumption taxes. You can't, shopkeepers can distinguish, ang income level mo kung bibis ka o hindi. So it's such a blunt instrument. That's why it's so traumatic and bludgeoning for poor Filipinos. And sa amin, is that kind of creative thinking sana na this new administration brings into the picture. Kahit na mahirap siya, I mean, we're not saying it's easy, but if it's not considered, the option is to make things even worse for poor and ordinary Filipinos.
Okay. Sunny Africa is Executive Director of Ibon Foundation. Sunny, maraming salamat.
Sige,
Thank
thank you
you.
po.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thank you, Sam.
Mahirap talaga.
Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to Chiefs on One News. And now joining us is Professor Ronilo Balbieran, who teaches economics at the University of Asia and the Pacific. Professor, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Good evening, Prof.
Good evening, Prof.
Good evening po.
Good evening po. So, Prof, I suppose you caught the tail end of our interesting discussion a while ago with the Ibon Foundation with Sunny Africa. Of course, we do also want to talk about the other things like yung projected increase mamaya ng presyo ng langis at epekto nun sa ibang bilhin. Pero kanina kasi, ang sinasabi ni Sunny Africa, we're putting too much dependence on consumption tax, indirect taxes versus their proposal for a direct tax on the wealthy, which he says would have more impact on revenues, less impact on the general population. What do you think po?
The tax on... masalimuot pong usapan yan, no? But most importantly is... kailangan natin maintindihan that this is a situation that is not caused by us, not caused by our government. This was caused by something else. No? So... and we have structures, tax structures in place, and we just have to kasi very direct na tong nararamdaman natin, and so it's important to work with the existing systems right now, and so additional tax rates, sige, pag-aralan ng mga eksperto sa tax, but it will take a while for us to actually put in place additional taxations. So ako, mas maganda na tingnan natin kung kung sino ba talaga ang tatamaan nitong mas malalaking mga pagtaas ng presyo ng langis, no? And most likely ito yung mga may hirap, maliliit na negosyo na dependent on transportation, no? So dependent on transportation. Good news, bad news yun, no? Good news, we're not really that dependent on oil as far as our energy is concerned. But the bad news is, so those who are related to transportation, whether you're a consumer or you're a business, no, talagang tatamaan ka. But for the rest of the economy, I think they have some compensating factors in terms of the growth of our economy. Kumbaga na ipapass on mo etong taas ng presyo ng langis sa pagtaas naman ng activities, no, so the rate of growth of our activities in business and in the economy in general.
Professor, gaya nga po na sabi niyo, masalimuot to, walang madaling sagot. But let me start na lang, baliktarin ko yung question. Para on the level lang muna ng principles and fundamentals. Kung mahirap sagutin kung ano ang tamang gawin, ano ang malinaw na mali? I mean, ano ang pwede natin, ano man lang ang malinaw na iwasan man lang nating gawin to. Iwasan man lang natin to make it worse.
Kumbaga naranasan natin ang hybrid work, no? So our employers, all the businesses in the Philippines should figure out a way, no, to encourage more hybrid work. So to lessen the expenditure on unnecessary travels. So if you are to travel, dahil kailangan mo talaga mag-sign ng isang malaking deal, no? Kailangan mo talaga magkaroon ng isang important na meeting na hindi magagawa through virtual platforms, no? So iwasan ng mga unnecessary travel, no? So pangalawa, iwasan din syempre ang we take advantage of some renewable mga renewable energy, no, para kasi malaking portion pa rin ng energy natin is dependent on oil. So kung some of our businesses and consumers would turn to solar power, so solar panels, so that would actually reduce our consumption of electricity and oil in many things that we do, no? So yun yung mga kailangan, I mean immediately, no, kung tatanungin niyo ako ano yung mga immediately maaaring nating maging solusyon sa bagay na to. And then of course, on the government spending side, we have to, rally our tax revenues very effectively so that we can rechannel the tax revenues into important social spending, especially to support our poor. No? And in relation to that, hindi naman, it's a combination of immediate cash transfer and, of course, job generation. Kasi nothing beats job generation. No? So if you are able to provide immediate jobs that will actually cover some of these increases in spending because of oil spending, no? So that would be the best kasi pagka job spending yan, so iikot lang uli pabalik sa ekonomiya natin yan, iikot yan pabalik sa ating gobyerno. So hindi yung talagang ipamimigay mo ng dire-diretso. But of course, there are some sectors of our society na talagang mismong pera na lang nila, ibibili na lang nilang na agahan at ang tanghalian ay mapupunta pa sa mas mataas na presyo ng langis, mas mataas na presyo ng pamasahe, halos wala na silang kakainin. So yon, rekta na talaga, ibibigay mo na talaga almost no, yung cash o yung pagkain para sa kanila. Mula dito sa higher tax collections because our government is collecting more from the excise taxes and VAT from these higher oil prices.
Pero what's your idea of job generation at this time? Dahil naghihirap din lahat ng mga negosyante, are you thinking of infrastructure construction? Anong panggagalingan ng jobs na yon?
Well, marami naman tayo na multi-purpose na spending ng government. So, tama po kayo doon, Ma'am Ami, no? So, kung infrastructure, but let's focus on what type of infrastructure, no? So infrastructure that is related to health, no? So, kung magpagawa na agad tayo ng mga medical facilities, especially doon sa mga tourism sites, we know that very soon, tourists, both foreign and domestic, will be coming to the Philippines very soon. No? So, before the pandemic, the record, at least for domestic travelers, is 110 million domestic trips. No? And we can imagine that will be achieved very soon. No? And saan natin ang laging problema ng ating mga turista ay yung ating mga ospital, ang ating mga medical facilities, clinics, no? So magbigay tayo ng trabaho, ang gobyerno makakapagbigay ng trabaho by investing as early as now. Actually dapat ginawa natin 'yan nung pandemic pa na talagang massive spending on these health related infrastructure that are concentrated on these tourism destinations. Why? Kasi baka huli na naman ng lahat kung kailang nandyan na yung mga turista tsaka natin ipapagawa yung ating mga ospital, yung ating mga CR, yung ating mga passenger terminals. So it's the time, no, parang bibigay kang trabaho para makapagbigay ka ng mga dagdag na kita, pero at the same time you're building the capacity of job generating, business generating sectors such as tourism. So yun po yung parang nakikita ko na multi-purpose, no, multiple impact as far as spending is concerned, no, both long term and short term, and nakakapag-generate po tayo ng additional na trabaho para sa ating lahat.
What about the agriculture sector, Prof? Na-mention nyo kanina, no? Among the very poor, of course, and the farmers are counted among them, no? And right now, we're talking about a food crisis. And yun na nga, yung mga traditional sources natin ng imported rice, nagbabantang mag-ban ng export. What about that? That part of our economy that provides us our basic food. What is the approach of the incoming government on that? What should be the approach?
That's a perfect question, Ma'am Lucy, no? So, and everybody's waiting for the appointment for the Department of Agriculture. But kung ako po yung tatanungin, mas gugustuhin ko po na magtalaga ng isang secretary sa Department of Agriculture that is an expert in e-commerce, no? Bakit? Kasi yung parang nahahati yung Pilipinas sa dalawang mundo, no? Yung isang mundo napaka progresibo. We're the fastest growing e-commerce in the whole of Southeast Asia in the middle of the pandemic. We grew by more than 90% for just 1 year, no? In the middle po ng pandemic. Ibig sabihin, we have the resources, we have the technology, we have the money for our e-commerce to grow. Pero at the same time, yung ating we have a very rich geographically endowed agriculture sector that could not actually grow by more than 1% in the last 10 years. No? So average 1%. So, but while the rest of the other sectors are growing at 5 to 6% bago nag-pandemic. And in fact, ngayon, ano na ulit tayo lahat, nag-recover na lahat ng industries, si agriculture nandoon pa rin. So, so bakit hindi po natin i-converge, no? A convergence of those two worlds. Let us bring down, no, those very high powered technologies, e-commerce opportunities. Ilagay natin sa agriculture. That's what China did in the last 10 years, no? Yung tinatawag nilang Taobao villages, rural communities, rural farming communities. They connected all these rural communities into e-commerce, no? So lahat sila naka-part ng mga digital menu ng mga smartphones sa buong China. So that, you know, their output, their agricultural output is actually visible for the rest of the country and for the rest of the world, so that they can actually order directly, no? So kung ito yung version, this is the digital version of the farm to market road, no? 'Di ba? Gustong-gusto natin yung farm to market road. Why? Kasi gusto mo na yung output mo diretso sa market, no? So that's the physical road, no? But I think the digital version of that direct road to the consumer is the e-commerce, the power of e-commerce, no? So kailangan pagsamahin natin, nandiyan na po yan, pinapakinabangan ng highly advanced industries, and i-merge po natin yan dito sa ating mga farmers. And ang ating mga farmers, marami naman sa kanila, naka-smartphones na, ang ating mga rural communities, naaabot na rin naman ng mga internet, and then may parating na mga technologies that can beam, no, internet in the middle of nowhere, no? So why don't we combine all these technologies and empower our farmers with the power of e-commerce, so that they can sell everything that they produce? Yun lang naman ang problema nila, hindi nila maibenta eh.
Oh, nga, but that's a good point.
Wala na yung middleman dyan.
Oh, that's a good point.
I mean,
Kasi I don't know, for the longest time, people can relate to what you're saying, but we always referred to the infrastructure as farm-to-market roads, and so on. But to your point, no, parang even with farm-to-market roads, there's something wrong with the market because it's not connecting the producers with the buyers. Just yesterday, may binalita dito sa One News, di ba? Yung Resto PH, we were talking to the Organization of Restaurateurs, and they were saying, hindi kami makasource ng mga gulay from abroad. In the meantime, tinatawagan sila ng mga producers dito, they were about to throw away carrots because magsuspoil lang. And so, ang question ko is, why is that? I mean, it sounds so basic, pero ano ba yung fundamentally yung problem? Why is there that disconnect between producers and our consumers? It's not just about middlemen. Parang that's precisely the point. Why is there that disconnect?
Well, only because we are not consolidating our efforts in our resources and treating agriculture just like any other internet retail good, no? So parang pumunta kayo sa mga cellphone nyo ngayon, nandiyan yung lahat ng gusto nyong bilihin, no? So why not idiretsa natin yan all the way to the agriculture, no? So ang pinakamalaki kasi na hindi natin, ang mahirap intindihin din, no? Kahit ako bilang isang economist, no? It took me more than 5 years to understand the concepts of supply chain. So kasi dikit-dikit yan, no? So dapat you have a very intricate complex arrangements from the transporters to the warehouse owners to the distributors, to the market vendors, etc., etc. So, but once you understand that and empower that whole supply chain with a digital platform na lahat sila, yung tinatawag natin na plug and play, no? So, And yan yung mga, no, and I'm very happy, no, I'm not very happy with the people who died because of the pandemic. But because of the pandemic, these digital platforms, these digital logistics solutions, naglipa na and offered for free for the agriculture, no? So yung the likes of the Mayani PH, and then there's this delivery platform. So ikadiwa ni Department of Agriculture. There are already accelerated efforts to put in place these digital platforms. Now, dalawang bagay yon, yung e-commerce side, no, yung buying side, but yung logistics, yung digital logistics on yung ano, no, ma-digitalize mo tong quote and quote the digital middleman, no? So but it will require the whole nation, no, both government and the private sector, lahat ng mga e-commerce players, logistics players, truckers, warehouses, etc., na magsama-sama so that we can see, no, the movement, the production and the movement of agricultural products would be very transparent. Yun lang naman eh. Kapag ka transparent ka, then you can actually predict, no, the demand, and then therefore supply can actually follow, and then malilesen po natin yung uncertainty and unpredictability in terms of ano ba talaga yung total demand out there, and therefore nahihirapan yung mga farmers natin to match the production in terms of the demand. So pag everything's transparent through these digital platforms, then there will be real-time clearing of the market. Then the farmers can fully sell all their outputs, and then wala pong masasayang, mas mababa po ang presyo ng ating pagkain, at lahat po ay masaya.
Sige, apart
Question,
from
gobyerno ba ang mag-i-initiate niyan, or organic ba yan dapat within the industry? Who will start it? Who will initiate the whole thing? Who will get the ball rolling, no?
Well, kaya po ang nasabi ko kanina, no? So I hope that the next the DA secretary is familiar with the inner workings of digital technology and e-commerce. Kasi kung alam po niya yan at nagkalat na po ang lahat ng mga very powerful applications, hindi na po ito i-imbentohin at mag-iintay po tayo ng 10 taon para ma-develop. Na-develop na po yan kahapon. Ang kailangan na lamang pong gawin ng gobyerno ay pagsamasamahin ito. Ipatawag niya lahat ng resources, both government and private sector, si DICT, DOST, DTI, no? Tapos patawag yung mga e-commerce players, even yung mga nandyan na mga tapos mga logistics players. Meron pong 14 associations being handled by DTI in terms of logistics services. So, kung pagsasama-samahin mo lahat yung mga private sector, no, the government's role is to coordinate, no, to facilitate all these interconnections so that people, businesses, citizens, no, and other government agencies related to agriculture will find their own way, no? Na ito yung map natin, itong objective natin. No? Kailangan magkakitaan ng production, ng demand, ng ordering system. O paano po kayo makakatulong dyan? Ay, meron po kaming app dito. Ito ang gamitin niyo po. Ay, ito meron po tayong para sa ganito, para sa farmers. Ay, ito po para sa mga nagdi-deliver, sa mga nagdi-distribute. Then everybody will share their resources, technology, effort, time. So the government just really needs to understand that resources are abundant out there, and they just need to pull everybody together.
Okay. Professor Ronilo Balbiran of the University of Asia and Pacific. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Ay, maraming salamat.
Thank you, sir.
And that will be all for this edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.